Good morning, everyone. Awesome. Love to hear all of you. This is great. Thank you all for joining us early this morning. We're super excited to have you join us for the inaugural symposium on enhancing the student experience of Asian Pacific Islander Middle Eastern descent. It's super exciting to just have all of you here. This is the second symposium that I've held in this room, and I'm like, oh, this is a lot, and the lights are a lot. So thank you for joining us early this morning. As we all come together today, we want to just share how excited we are that you're ready to be here collectively to engage with us, to learn, to reflect, and also discuss and apply what you have for today. It has been an honor to be a co-chair of this symposium, and I get to do it with a lot of amazing folks here in this room. You'll get to know them, you'll get to see them. I do want to recognize that my co-chair, Wendy Sasaki, is not here today. She is with her family, supporting whatever they need at this moment. So for that, I just want to make sure that she has a shout out. But with that being said, the hope for today is that you get to focus and you get to learn on our Asian Pacific Islander Middle Eastern students and see where you can apply some of the great work that we've seen around campus into the work in your departments and your role. So with that being said, just wanted to pass it off to Brian, who has stepped up to be my co-chair. So.
Hello, everyone. So just again, before we get into the goings of today, just wanted to do a quick thank you to the Division of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, as well as the Division of Student Affairs and Associated Students. They really helped with their sponsorship and kind of empowered us to, create and have this be the inaugural event, like Andrew said, right? So being able to support the UC San Diego community with something like this is really exciting. Also, before we jump into our remarks, I also wanted to recognize the land that we're on today and have a quick land acknowledgement. So the UC San Diego community holds great respect for the land and the original people of the area where our campus is located. The university is built on the unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. Today, the Kumeyaay people continue to maintain their political sovereignty and cultural traditions as vital members of the San Diego community. We acknowledge their tremendous contributions to our region and thank them for their stewardship. Thank you for acknowledging the land. Additionally, I also want to encourage you to go beyond this land acknowledgement. So there's different ways to kind of learn about the history of the land that we're on, and there's a resource here that the Intertribal Resource Center has provided. So feel free to kind of go there and look to see, what land we're on and kind of the history about it. Now, with that said, we'll have our remarks from Executive Vice Chancellor Elizabeth Simmons.
Yes. And right before we jump in, round of applause for Brian. I can't tell you enough how much I appreciate Brian just being here, just stepping up as kind of my pseudo co-chair. Could not have done it. And of course, the committee members you'll get to know as well. So this is our core committee. So if you are a core committee member, can you just make yourself known, shout out, raise your hand, give them a round of applause. Truly amazing. And we could not do it without not only the core committee members, but also our subcommittee members who make the experience happen and are, focused on the two different areas that we're hoping to share with you, which is, we understand the Asian diaspora is very large, very huge, and very diverse, and we are trying to consume it all in 2 days, right? So we have experience of the domestic students, and we also have the international students. So these are our subcommittee members. If you don't mind making yourself known, and also give a round of applause to our subcommittee members. And I do want to say that it is a huge accomplishment having to pull this group together and accomplish it within about 4 months. So major kudos to putting on a symposium in that amount of time. But with that being said, just like Brian, we do have remarks from EVC Simmons. Our Executive Vice Chancellor, Elizabeth Simmons, will have a video for us.
Thank you for the introduction. Welcome, everybody, to day one of UC San Diego's inaugural symposium on enhancing the experiences of students of Asian, Pacific Islander, and Middle Eastern descent. This two-day event is a learning opportunity.
It's still morning for us all.
Enhancing the experiences of students of Asian, Pacific Islander, and Middle Eastern descent. This two-day event is a learning opportunity for faculty and staff to better understand how the experiences and perspectives of Asian, Pacific Islander, and Middle Eastern students can impact their experiences at UC San Diego and the ways in which they navigate our university community. Now, while this symposium focuses on broad groups of student demographic identities, I think we're all aware that there are key differences between the experiences of domestic and international students of Asian, Pacific Islander, and Middle Eastern descent, and between the experiences of students from different cultural subcommunities. We'll also keep ourselves mindful of the unique experiences that individual students within these groups may have. You're coming together today and tomorrow in a spirit of collective impact to share data and methods, to think ahead to mutually reinforcing activities among a variety of campus units is tremendously important for our aspiration to erase opportunity gaps in student access and success. So thank you again for your participation and for your efforts to make us a truly inclusive and student-centered UC San Diego.
So round of applause. So the Executive Vice Chancellor Simmons was hoping to be here today. However, they had some planned time away, some travel plans, so they couldn't be here, but we appreciate the video that was being provided. But with that being said, we also have some other additional guests that have joined us and participants. So I would like to invite Vice Chancellor Dr. Alysson Satterlund to the stage to give remarks as well.
Good morning. So having spent the weekend with thousands of Tritons and their families for commencement 2022, I'm double masking for a few more days. So for those of you that I have not had the opportunity to meet, and for those of you I do know but aren't quite sure who I am, behind my precautionary face coverings, it's really my honor to serve as your Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs. My name's Alysson Satterlund. She, her, and hers. And in partnership with Vice Chancellor Becky Pettit, our Vice Chancellor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, who you will hear from tomorrow, we are thrilled to welcome you with the support of Chancellor Khosla and Evie Simmons to the inaugural APIMED Symposium at UC San Diego. Woo! I know this has been a work in progress for some time. So first, VC Pettit and I wanted to express our sincere gratitude to our symposium organizers and for convening this two-day immersive learning experience for all of us, with special recognition to Wendy and Dulce, Andrew, Brian, Diana, and Joanne. Thank you so very much for your leadership. So I wanted to begin by sharing our statement on student-centeredness. UC San Diego is committed to being a student-centered research university by putting all students first, inviting and respecting their voices and existing strengths, and honoring the intersectional identities of our Triton community. As a campus, we hold ourselves and each other accountable to transformative action that ensures equity, inclusion, and success across all aspects of the student experience at UC San Diego. And in coming together today, we celebrate student-centeredness as well as the powerful diversity of our APIMED students' experience. We also honor the value of investing in our learning, investing our time, our money, our energy, our focus in the professional learning required of each of us to truly be student-centered as a community. With this, VC Pettit and I also want to thank you all for your time today and tomorrow. Nearly half of all UC San Diego students are of Asian, Pacific Islander, or Middle Eastern descent, comprising a multitude of identities that informs and impacts their day-to-day experience as Tritons, how they navigate our campus, our services and our resources, and our learning environments and the campus climate. As we strive to be student-centered, it is our responsibility to more fully understand our APIMED students and their unique individual lived experiences. By participating in this symposium, you are actively doing just this. So as you participate, I ask you to consider how may we better support and enhance our APIMED students' experience. Those who have become Tritons by way of San Diego or California or from the States, as well as those who have joined us from all around the world. Today, the symposium will focus on the experience of our APIMED international students. As you might expect, the experience of our international students are distinct from those of our domestic students. So with this in mind, today's featured speaker is Dr. Christina Yao, an associate professor of higher education at the University of South Carolina. Dr. Yao is a qualitative researcher who studies undergraduate and graduate student engagement and learning in higher education and has published work on international students of color at U.S. universities. We are very, very fortunate to have her visit with us today and to share her expertise. So let's get started in this important and exciting work. And I'd like to bring Andrew and Brian back to the stage, who are going to ground our symposium in some critically important data. So may I invite you back, Andrew and Brian, and thank you all very much for being here today to do this important work and important learning. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, E.P. Simmons and Vice Chancellor Satterlund, for being here and also sharing your remarks. We want to begin the day by just going over some of the data that we have access to in regards to our students of Asian Pacific Islander and Middle Eastern descent. Some of the data that we've gathered as well is some aspects of what you all filled out in your kind of like the pre-assessment of the registration form. So we will get our laptop switched up and we'll be able to present. Awesome. So who is here today for the next 2 days? This is what we have gathered. Because the symposium is focused on having staff and faculty join us, we learn together, and then we can apply that to the work that we all do. Majority of us are staff. We do have some faculty members in the space with us as well. We have grad students that are here that are presenting, so you'll meet some of those grad students during your sessions. And then, of course, we have guest speakers. As VC Satterlund has shared, we have Dr. Christina Yao, but we also have a number of folks that are joining us throughout the day. So one of the things that we did ask is, according to the UC Information Center Disaggregated Data Dashboard, in fall 2021, approximately what percentage of UC San Diego students, and sorry, it's just cut off because the graph doesn't allow it to go further, identify as a Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. So this is what registrants had selected. We understand that we received some inquiries of, where is this data sitting? How do I get this data? There's different dashboards everywhere. So one of the biggest things and we wanted to do is not test our registrants, but more of spreading awareness. And for those who were able to find the data by going to the symposium's website and find the link, then you were able to find some of the data and answer the question. But again, it was not for you to go searching, go diving. It's just to spread awareness and bring it here and how do we learn together and what we have. So for some of us, we're like, what is the right answer? The answer that is shown on the disaggregated dashboard is 0.6%. So 21.9% had answered with that answer. Then we also asked, true or false, according to the UC Information Center Disaggregated Data Dashboard, the Asian demographic can be filtered to separate domestic and international student demographics. This is how our registrants, and we do want to recognize we had 150 registrants, plus We had some folks step back, and also some folks added in as the wait list when we had more space as we got more registrants. So with that being said, the answer here is true. So 40.6%. You can do that on the dashboard with UC Information Center. Awesome. And then we have, according to the UC Information Center disaggregated data dashboard in fall 2021, students that identify as Middle Eastern are included in what racial demographic category? The answer here is Southwest Asian North African. So for some of you, if you are used to looking at, let's say, the UC Census Bureau, oh, not UC, US Census Bureau, most of those who identify Middle Eastern sometimes are classified as white. So that's where it looks a little bit different in how we disaggregate and how we identify students within the UC system. Lastly, we did ask, what resources do students utilize? And this is a breakdown of both our domestic and our international students. So as you can see, it's not a surprise for our domestic students. They are well aware and often utilize our API-Meta programs. And then for international students, which makes total sense, is to work with ISPO, our International Student Center, as they have to work through visas and other steps, and ISPO is our great partners on making that all happen. But what you see here is the top 10 that were taken from the responses. These are the top 10 that folks, the registrants yourselves, had identified in resources that students utilize.
So also just wanted to highlight from here, if we notice, there's a decent amount of people who said something to the effect of like, I'm not really sure, or I hope to learn. And that's great. That's the whole point of the symposium today, right? So hopefully if you're someone who was in that situation where like, oh, I'm not really sure what these are, thank you for being here, and we're happy to hopefully contribute to your learning today. One other thing, so I know that Andrew had mentioned the UC Information Disaggregated Dashboard. So I know in the form, I think it had said a different place where you could find that. We just really wanted to make sure to highlight that that was a little bit of our bad in making the question, and that this would be where the information is correctly, right? So you would find it at the UC Information Center Disaggregated Data Dashboards. Wanted to say that because next we have some data from our own institutional research, and I just want to give them a quick shout out. They were able to give us this data that would be harder for us to find. So thank you very much for international or institutional research for being able to kind of tease out some of this data and be able to have us look at it a little bit more closely and in kind of more of a deep dive. So as we can see here, this is our proportion of Asian and Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, international, and domestic undergraduate students. This is from 2012 to 2021. I think so, as you are looking at this, there's a few kind of highlights or key takeaways that we want to make sure that people are looking at, right? So though the count of our Asian American domestic students has increased over the past 10 years, their proportional representation has been, kind of on a decline / it's relatively steady, but there's been a decline of about 7 percentage points from fall 2012 to fall 2021. For the Asian international students, the percentage has been relatively stable, but that means, just because of the way percentages and proportions work, that the Asian international students have increased about 2.5 times the amount from fall 2012 to fall 2021. And then lastly, you may notice near the bottom of the graph, the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, both American and international students are in that 0 to less than 1%. Part of the reason that that's the case is because just the head counts, the way that the data is counted, there's just not enough of them to count towards more than a percentage or being close to 0. So for example, with the international students, there's less than 5 Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander international students that are present in the head count for the last 10 years. So it counts as a 0%, even though that they're here, right? So I think as we're looking at this data, what does that mean for a group of students to be counted as 0% when there are physical people here, kind of looking for community, looking for ways to belong, right? Our next graph here is our proportion of Southwest Asian North African, or SWANA, domestic and international undergraduates. So again, this is kind of similar sort of graphs that we can see. Here, the green and the yellow lines correspond to the Southwest Asian American domestic and the SWANA American combined, right? So I think something that for me really stuck out when I was looking at this was that for the SWANA American combined for the domestic students, it's pretty much primarily from our Southwest Asian Americans, right? Which means our North African students are kind of in that like hidden minority kind of category in this sense, right? They're a much smaller percentage to the overall SWANA community. So similarly to the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students, right? How are they experiencing campus when they're being grouped into these like larger kind of racial categories, right? And then that's not even to say that the international students, right? So again, for the green and yellow lines, those are both our domestic populations, which means that the Southwest Asian and North African international students are very, very small, less than that 1%, right? Okay. Just a few more graphs. Don't worry, we'll get a little bit more going after this, but I just wanted to kind of highlight, so this is our proportion of our broad Asian ethnic categories, as well as our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander for both international and domestic students again. So this counts for all of those like kind of more specific categories, makes them grouped out into these larger ones with our East Asian, Filipino, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, South Asian, Southeast Asian, and other Asian. So we have that for both domestic and international. I think that for me, again, when I was looking at this, it's very interesting to kind of see some of these key takeaways being, Asian American representation is being relatively stable for the most part, but again, seeing them spread out in these different kind of more disaggregated ways, these larger kind of groups and categories, is interesting to see. We have a larger proportion of our East Asian population, and then our Filipino American and Southeast Asian and South Asian American are kind of the next ones, right? And then there's this, I don't know if it's seeable, but we have I just wanted to highlight the ones that are less than that 1%. So our Filipino International is less than 1% for all of the years. South Asian International is less than 1% for pretty much all other years. Our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander International population is less than 1% for 2012 and 2021, and is 0% for all the other years, again, because of the head count and the way that they're counted in the system. Southeast Asian International students are less than 1% for 2012 to 2014, and then 1% from 2015 to 2021. And then our other Asian demographic for our domestic population is 1% from 2012 to 2015, and less than 1% from 2016 to 2021. Some of you may be wondering what this other Asian category is. So there's a lot of different Asian ethnicities that can be ranked on the UC application, and if there is a person who does not identify in one of those ones, there's also another category that's just listed as other Asian. So it kind of captures a lot of different people, and again, kind of puts them in this group of people that may or may not be similar to them. Okay. So as we were looking at this, right, we can kind of see the percent change across these different groups and these different categories. So again, this is done by both international and our domestic population. And I just kind of invite you all to kind of take a moment to look at the percentages and how they've changed from 2012 to 2021. So, as we can see, there are some large percentage changes, right? Our South Asian international students have grown quite a lot, as well as our other Asian international students. But again, these are percentages kind of relative to their own group, right? So even though we may have been seeing some of these really large changes, the campus overall is also growing, right? So their proportional representation doesn't necessarily mean that it's growing in a significant amount, which goes to say that similarly, right, for the ones that are not as growing as much, or have a percent decrease, again, kind of what does that look like for them as they navigate campus and kind of think about, if there are if we are seeing them kind of have an increase, but not a proportional increase, then how does that impact their student experience? And then lastly, I just wanted to do a quick shout out for our graduate students, right? So I know that we focused a lot on our undergraduate students, but graduate students are part of this symposium and part of this experience as well. So if we can see here, our Asian American representation from 2012 to 2021 has been relatively stable. We were in that like 15 to 14% kind of range. And then if we look at the head counts, the head counts of Asian American graduate students have increased by about 42% total in terms of like total numbers of them, right? For our Filipino Asian American representation, it's relatively stable, but it's low, right? So we have that like kind of 1 to 2%. And then similarly for them, the head count has increased about 71% from fall 2012 to 21. And then kind of as has been the theme with our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander Americans, their headcount has been less than 10 every year for the past 10 years. So that means that they're close to that like 0% based on the way the headcount works, because for our graduate students, there's just not very many of them. And I also wanted to point out that this is our American graduate students. The data that we were given and that we had didn't include our international students in this count. So again, I just wanted to invite you all to kind of think about what this data means and how that impacts the way we think about the students that are in this very broad category of Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern descent, right? I think that's pretty much it for the data portion. So hopefully the graphs weren't too boring at this morning. But I do want to take a moment to invite our next speaker up. We're going to be taking a deeper dive, and we've invited Provost Wayne Yang to share some critical ethnic studies approach to the laws and histories that have kind of constructed this Orientalist imagery that has impacted Asian, Pacific Islander, and Middle Eastern populations. So Provost Yang will move towards the idea of coalition kind of across differences rather than ethnic minority groups. So please welcome Provost Yang.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for coming out on week 14 of spring quarter. And I guess I just want to say I was asked to, can you see this? Okay. Hello, play from current slide. No, that's not what I want. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Okay. Don't touch it, Wayne. All right, so I want to say I was asked to do this. This is not actually my area of specialty, and it was like, hey, talk about everything critical history and laws for this entire tent of AsianPacificIslander, and you got 30 minutes, go. So for me, this sort of feels like Top Chef. I've never been in this kitchen before, and I don't have a stock presentation to give, and so I've never done this before, and I wanted to ask for a little bit of grace and forgiveness. I have to generalize about particularities, which you're never supposed to do in ethnic studies. And these are groups with intersectional differences. And finally, I'm not going to be able to cite all my sources or credit all the images, so it's totally an act of plagiarism. But here we go. I'm going to try to keep it light, accessible, short. It's going to kind of feel like everywhere, everyone, all at once, that kind of thing. Okay, so my approach to doing this was, is this working? There. Yeah, I wanted to have a grounding question. So I thought I'd ask this question: what makes us and us? And I suspect I was invited because I fit in this tent of AsianPacificIslander. And this is a group that is so different. So we've got folks in this group who are Black. And whether Black from North Africa, Black from the Middle East, Black in phenotype from the South Asian, Indian subcontinent, Black from Melanesia, or Black American who happen to also be AsianPacificIslander, right? This is a group like that. We have indigenous folks who come from sovereign nations, and then we've got this whole umbrella of Asian. So I'm really hoping in this alphabet soup today that you get out of my presentation is that we are very, very different groups. And yet we are very connected, right? And this this sort of contradiction is that particularly over these 2 days, we're talking about domestic and international, that particular framing, that divide, that is really connected, domestic and international, that racialization of domestic students is always internationally inflected. And the experience of international students is always through the racialization of our domestic students. So I hope if you get nothing out of my presentation, it's that. And so I guess I'll start with, what makes us an us? Is it common phenotype? The answer is no. And even the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is not your most radical source for ethnic studies information, they say now that there's more diversity within groups than between groups. And you get a sense of this is sort of the shade of the world, according to Britannica. And I guess I'll just say no, race is a social construction. So AsianPacificIslander is not a race, but it is racially inflected, right? So next question. Is it a common culture? Is it a common language, religion, customs? Do we all eat rice? Like, what's going on? And this is a map of the quote-unquote Middle East, and these are all the different ethnicities in just this area of that map of this globe. Likewise, if we look at just the language of Arabic, these are all the different dialects of Arabic spoken. And you'll notice they go even beyond the region that the United States tends to designate as the Middle East, right? These are the languages spoken on the South Asian Indian subcontinent. This is just the Philippines, all right? So no, there is no common culture. We are more diverse within groups than across groups, okay? Knocking this stuff out. So is it Asia? Is it because it's just a really big continent? I mean, this is a legitimate question. And I searched, is Asia a continent on Google? And it said yes. And so is Africa, and so is Europe. So is North America. Now, is it really even a continent? So this is kind of funny. So as a STEM field, a STEM-oriented university, I looked up the definition continent, and actually Asia is not a continent. So the continents are defined by tectonic plates, and Eurasia is actually a tectonic plate. There is no Middle Eastern continent. And then if you look at the Ring of Fire, in fact, our Pacific Island communities come from the edges between tectonic plates, and that's why there's so much volcanic activity. So what the heck is Asia? Well, it's really a fiction, and it comes from this British preoccupation, and the Brits weren't the only ones to do it, but we're living with the British 20th century understandings of this, which is they thought of primarily the Ottoman Empire as the Near East. So that's this whole area. They're like, wow, that's the Near East. Those people are exotic. And then, that was a joke, you can laugh, all right. So, and then beyond the Near East, like to the right of that, they used to call that the Middle East. Now today, that's all now called the Middle East, right? So the Middle East is this thing that keeps changing in size and imagination, right? And then beyond that is the Far East. So all this East stuff is how the idea of Asia came about. It's not a real thing, right? It is a political imaginary. So, so to summarize, no. East, Middle East, Far East, Asia, the Pacific, these are imperial imaginaries, right? These are imaginations of countries looking to expand their influence and their territory beyond their nations, right? So this leads me to the more meaty stuff, which is my favorite question. Is it spam, right? Is it colonization? And I know this seems funny and it's a joke, but I have a prize for someone who can tell me, well, first of all, how many people have eaten spam? All right, can you tell me, so spam has a major distributor around the world. What is it? Hormel. Hormel is the company, but that's not the answer I'm looking for. Thank you. Who said that? Amanda. Okay, Amanda, of course, our closing speaker. I have a prize. I have a prize for you, Amanda. So, is it colonization, right? So the U.S. is not always called an empire, but some people call it an empire of bases. These are almost 1,000 military bases around the world, and everywhere you go, you'll find spam. So where am I going with this? Well, let me cite a recent book called Tastes Like War by Korean-American author Grace Cho, and she's exploring her mother's schizophrenia. And for her, her mother is schizophrenic because of her experiences of war and her experiences of racism. And her way of connecting to her mother through her schizophrenia is to learn how to cook Korean food that her mother used to cook. And one of the things that she does is, she'll have her mother taste the food, and there's this dish called kimchi bokkeumbap, right, which is basically like a kimchi fried rice kind of thing, right? And it's very, very, very traditionally made with spam. So, ancient Korean dish. So, so she makes it with spam, and she feeds it to her mom, and her mom hates it. And she's like, but why? This is the traditional way of making it. And her mom says, because it tastes like war. Right? And this has to do with her experience of the war and war food, right? So the next important thing is with our Pacific Islander communities, you're going to find a lot of spam, right, in the quote-unquote traditional dishes, right? And there's at least 6 nations within the United States sphere of influence, I'll call it, empire, and they're up here. The 3 on top are post-World War II acquisitions of the United States, and the 3 below are more late 20th century US empire. I'm going to come back to this, but, and I deliberately put Republic of Hawaii on there. It's a little bit of my politics, because Hawaii was illegally annexed by the United States, and that's why it's a state. So here's a sense of the timeline around the annexation of these places in the 19th century. And again, 1898, this is the first law I'm going to mention. So these things are not just by conquest, they're by legal design, and race is also by legal design, as hopefully you get from my talk. This is the legal overthrow of the Kingdom of Hawaii, and this is a protest over 100 years later in front of the palace. And this is 1898, and it was actually brought about by Congress. It was a joint resolution signed for the annexation of the Kingdom of Hawaii, 1898. That's how Hawaii became, it was written on paper, and that's how it became a territory of the United States. This other photo in black and white is in honor of the 1921 Hawaiians Homes Commission Act. So the annexation of Hawaii and all lands actually in the United States are interest in land, and interest in settlement, interest in extraction, interest in development, right? And this is the long history of Native American displacement and genocide, and of the importation of particularly African folks to folks of African descent to sort of work the land, right? But in Hawaii, what this meant was the annexation is they lost all their land with a signature, except for crown lands, which were under the last reigning monarch was Queen Liliuokalani, Lilo and Stitch. Lilo's named after her. And because the crown lands were carried over into government lands, in 1921, they were able to pass a law saying that crown lands at least could be returned to Hawaiians, right? And it's because it's legal, because it's their property, right? And so this was the Hawaiian Homestead Act, or Hawaiian Home Commissions Act, and that's a photo detailing that. Except when this law was written, it was written that only Hawaiians, a blood quantum rule is written in. So blood quantum meaning like you have to be a certain amount of blood, right? Even though Hawaiians were a nation, not a blood group, and it was 50%. And that was written by agricultural businesses. The first governor of Hawaii, by the way, was Dole, as in the pineapple, right? And so this was written in hopes that Hawaiians would disappear through blood quantum and never have access to their land. So they're trying to get this land, even though it's only a few 100,000 acres out of entire islands, right? So my point with this is the racialization of Hawaiians, and you can see this resonances with your own racializations, was written to disappear them and get their land, right? And that is why we have, and here's an art piece by Brandon Eng about Hawaiian blood quantum. And you will see a picture, someone holding up a sign saying they're 40%, which means they're not eligible to have land on their island. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we actually have, in California, the largest Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander population outside of Hawaii. In fact, we're almost the same as Hawaii. And these are just people who report essentially 100% blood quantum, right? It's double this amount when you take into account, Black Hawaiian folks, right? Or, Vietnamese Hawaiian folks. So, but when we look at the UC system and we're 0.6% Hawaiian Pacific Islander, we are the state with the largest proportion of Pacific Islanders in the Union outside of Hawaii, and we're almost the same as Hawaii, right? We have a special responsibility to this group, and it's because they are here because of colonization. They are displaced from their lands through racism, through blood quantum, through seizure, right? And that's the first law I want to cover. Moving along. However, going back to my question, is it spam? Well, when you look at the Pacific Islands, you have multiple colonizers. This is 1951 when spam was at its height. And you can see you got the French in there, you got the Germans, you got other folks. And so actually, no, it's not just spam, right? So I'm guessing that the French don't eat spam, but I don't know. And if you look at Southeast Asia, similarly, there's no single colonizer, right? If you look at the quote-unquote Middle East, there's no single colonizer. And indeed, if we look beyond sort of the 1950s and the turn of the 20th century, there are other big colonizers in the world. I'm of Chinese descent, so I'll say sorry. So China was an empire, as you know, for thousands of years and colonized multiple places. And then more recently, Japan exercised imperial designs, right, throughout the Pacific. Right, so what I'm getting at is even though spam, I would love it if spam was the common thing. Not everyone in the Epimeda group eats spam for different reasons, besides the taste. There is no common oppressor, right? And sometimes, indeed, we are each other's oppressors. So what does it make us, like, how is it possible to have this group? And so that gets me to theory, which is it Orientalism? And so Orientalism, as you can see from this image, is sort of like a sexualized, gendered, racialized, exoticized concept about what the East, Far East, Near East, Middle East is. But it didn't just apply to Asia, it actually applied to everywhere the discoverers from Europe would go, right? So when they went to around the, West Africa, did all these voyages, they actually always drew the same people. So if you look at those drawings, they drew the same people everywhere they went. It was only recently where they decided that everyone was a different race, but for a while everyone was just sort of the same phenotypical race. But with Orientalism, I'm drawing from the great Palestinian literary theorist, Edward Said, who does a critique of this idea of Orientalism. And he says the Orient and the Occident are man-made. So Occident means the West. We don't use it anymore, even though we still use the word Oriental every now and then. And Occidental, we should bring it back. I'm just kidding. But he said these are man-made ideas, and they serve a purpose, right? And he draws, as a literary critic, he draws from this big travel writer and big author, Flaubert. And Flaubert liked to write about his acquaintance with a certain woman that he called Kuchuk Hanum, which is actually a generic name. It's not probably her real name, but she was sort of a court courtesan, if you know what I get my feeling. And probably he was talking about sex, like having sex with her, and just like, wow, look, I did it, right? I got big hands or whatever. So that was also a joke. I know my jokes are terrible, but feel free to laugh, right? And he describes all this, and what Said says is really, really smart, which is this like, in all these writings about Kuchuk Hanum, she never spoke of herself. She never represented her own emotions, her presence, or her history. He spoke for her and represented her. And that's the root of Orientalism. And here's some images that are the long tradition of people like Flaubert in imagining an Orientalized woman. And as you can see, they're not all quote-unquote Asian, it's sort of this generic, sometimes they're white, right, in a phenotype. And so representation for Said was never just about literature. It was how it shapes the world, right? How it shapes governments, wars, laws, policies, how it shapes how we think of each other, how it shapes institutions like universities. And so I want to now jump into the law part, right? So law is a consequence of these representations, and I want you to think through all the laws I'm going to cover really, really in fun, really exciting ways. I want you to think about Orientalism, right, and its impact. And this was a reminder to myself to click the link, but I was smarter, and I actually think I did this where, oh my God. I don't have a mouse cursor on, oh, here it is, okay. Oh my God, the link doesn't work. This is a critical link, folks, because I didn't want to make slides, and so here we go. Just bear with me, think about spam. All right, can you see my browser? Yes, excellent. What happened to my browser? Where'd it go? Here we go, all right. Okay, so let me make this bigger. This is the United States now. And these are all the laws that the Supreme Court heard deciding who's what race. It's fascinating. Fascinating, right? The first law the Supreme Court heard was, that established Chinese people are not white. Any idea why they were hearing all these cases on what race you were? I mean, the Supreme Court should have better things to do. Yeah, because to be a citizen, you had to be white. So these are citizenship cases. So Native American are not white, Hawaiians are not white, Chinese are not white, Burmese are not white, Japanese are not white, Chinese are not white, Mexicans are white, Native Americans are not white, Japanese are not white, Japanese are not white, people who are half white, not white, Asian whites, probably not white. That's my favorite one. Hopefully I'll get back to that later, I'll probably forget. Syrians are white, pay attention to that one. Asian Indians are white, pay attention to that one. Syrians are not white. So this is also the other thing with race, is they'd always change their minds. It's like, are they white? They're not white. Are the Irish white? No. Yes, they are now, right? Are Poles white? Yes, no. Because they really didn't actually want Irish, Poles, and Italians for a long time, right? So they actually weren't white. But then people go, oh, Syrians are white again. Filipinos are not white. Koreans are not white, so on and so forth, right? I think you get the idea. Arabians are not white, and then they are. Right? It's fascinating, the whole race thing. It's a social construction. But all these laws march all the way up until the 20th century. This is recent history, y'all. This is not like hundreds of years ago, as they always say, right? Let me see if I can get back to my slideshow. Play from current slide, please, work. Yeah, and so what they were really trying to answer is like, what the heck is white? Because they didn't know. They created a law saying only white people could be citizens, but there wasn't, people in Europe didn't think they were white. They were just like, no, we are, Germans, we're French, we're so and so forth, right? So it's the United States that really invented the racial science that actually then Hitler used. I'm gonna keep it moving. All right, so my next question is, or along with this Orientalism, is what is our relationship as this giant umbrella group under APIMEDA, for which I hope you saw how the laws apply to different groups? Is it homonationalism? This is the only big word I'm gonna use, I promise, today, right? And it's because I really like this word. It's by the Sikh, South Asian scholar, Jasbir Puar, who writes a lot about terrorism and sexuality and gender and nationalism. And she came up with this phrase, homonationalism. And she used homonationalism to refer to this idea that, when you're making certain gains in assimilating and integrating into society, in this case, LGBTQ folks, what are you reproducing, right? Are you reproducing this anti-terrorist, anti-Muslim discourse? And her answer is like, yeah, we are, right? And so she called that homonationalism. I think it's a great word. I also just I like all kinds of things about the word. But think of this as, you're trying to be the man, Everybody knows you're not, right? And an example I want to give from all those laws I gave was all those people were suing for citizenship. And they were suing on the grounds of being white. So like that first Chinese person, they were like, I'm white. And the Supreme Court is like, oh, no, you're not, right? And so I want to highlight just one. It's not to single out any group, but it's a very, very important case by Bhagat Singh Thind, who was a Sikh man from India. And he sued on the basis of being white. And he had a great argument. He's like, you know, you all think you're Caucasian. Guess where the Caucasus Mountains are at? It's in India. It's like, I'm actually Caucasian. And they're all, wow, that's a head scratcher. you know. And so they finally had to tell him, like, you're right, you're white. And that's why under Thind, it'll be like, oh, they are white. They're like, you're scientifically white. And they're like, however, everybody knows you're not white. And so they said, common sense tells us you're not white, even though scientifically you are, so you cannot be a citizen. I know that's deep. And that's usually how we teach in ethnic studies. People are like, damn, that's messed up. Wow. Except the part we never talk about is like, he's suing to be white, right? And his argument was like, I own property, I served in the military, I'm high caste, right? So I'm dominant oppressor type from where I come from. So I'm just like y'all, let me in. So what kind of argument is that? And Jasbir Puar would say that's homonationalism. And so how much is it that being in this big tent means we're making homonationalist arguments, right? That's kind of where I'm going with that. I'm sorry, Jasbir Puar, for destroying your theory. Moving along. Next question. So if it isn't all these things, or Orientalism is part of it, what more is there? Is it war? Is it war that makes all these groups a group in the United States? This is a picture from a graphic novel, and it's called Indian Country. And it's in Vietnam. And it's because the US military still uses the term Indian country to refer to enemy territory. And it's because all of this country was enemy territory, right? And all the military approaches that really modernized our military post-Civil War were developed to kill Native people. Right? And these are wars of extermination, of genocide, not wars of conquest or victory. And so we create zones of death. We checker mark the board. We create forts from which we can ride out or fly out and kill lots of people. Right? And zones of death means, like, if you cross this area, it doesn't matter who you are, we're killing you. Right? These are technologies developed for quote-unquote Indian country. And so this Orientalism of Asia was actually applied domestically to Native people. And you can see this Orientalist imaginary. This is a movie John Wayne produced called The Green Berets. I love this movie. I'm sorry. Watched this as a kid all the time. But you can see sort of this Orientalist imaginary come up with how we perform war. But there are laws associated with wars. Wars are never about just fighting. Wars are about legal. There is no war without law. There's a law that allows you and justifies your war. And so I want to point to an important one at the tail end of the quote-unquote Indian wars in this country post-Civil War, when we're enacting genocide on Native Americans, and that is the Modoc War. And what this was a band of Modoc people, about, I think, 150 of them, who were like, forget your reservation. We're going back to everywhere we're from, which is everywhere, right? And so they just left the reservation. That was their crime. It was a crime of existence. And they end up in the lava beds, and 50 Modoc warriors held off 400 US Army cavalry folks for like a year. I mean, it's really like some badassery, okay, to be honest. But in the end, they surrendered, and then 6 of them were tried by the same people they just fought. And 4 of them were executed, including, quote-unquote, Captain Jack is what I called him. And this was a totally illegal execution, right? Illegal trial. It went to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court made a very important decision. They said it was legal. And they said it's because Native Americans are not people. They're enemy combatants. And therefore, anyone can murder a Native person, and it's not a crime. This is a medieval law, actually. I mean, that's deep. Anyone can murder a Native person and it is not a crime. This connects directly to Orientalism because that's exactly what then we use now in modern warfare. All right, so this is an image from a cartoon from the Philippines, where the US is going right after this in 1890s to take over Spanish Empire. And the famous order from General Smith was kill everyone over 10 years old, right? And they did the same thing they did in Indian country, which is they set up checkerboards, zones of death, and they just murdered people wholesale. All right, so part of this is like these laws create murderable people, people who can be killed. You can make war on them for the simple fact of their existence and what we perceive, or what we now call their race, right? So the outcome of this Spanish-American War was we got the Philippines, we got Guam, we got Puerto Rico, we quote-unquote liberated Cuba. Let's move along to war, all right? Fast forwarding a little bit to World War II, Executive Order 9066, which is the incarceration of all people of Japanese American descent. Really, it's focused on California and like the West. So California is not a good guy in any of these stories. So we all know about this history, but what we're not as familiar with is the same principle was applied to indigenous Unanga people. This is very important to me because my main collaborator is Eve Tuck, and she's an Unanga, so I don't know if you all read my stuff, but cool. If you did, Tuck and Yang, no? Crickets, all right. But thank you, Amanda. Oh, thank you, Jason. That's because Jason got his PhD this year, woohoo, good, heads up. All right, Dean Jason Thibodeau. All right, so Unanga are called Aleuts, and they're from this chain of islands. And in World War II, they were all forcibly, involuntarily relocated to concentration camps in Tlingit, Haida, and Tsimshian territory. These are actually maps by Scripps professor Sarah Ahrens, who did them for her friend and colleague, who is a professor. I'm blanking on her name right now, I'm so sorry. And 10% of the people died in those camps. 10% in 2 years, right? So this displacement of indigenous people and the displaceability of indigenous people is connected to Orientalism, is connected to like the treatment of Middle Eastern folks, folks of, in Philippines, the quote-unquote Asians, right? So also at the end of World War II, the US acquired more territory, specifically Marshall Islands, what we now think of as the Federated States of Micronesia, Palau. This part is important because the students who are quote-unquote domestic Pacific Islanders, it's acquisitions of war. And the students who are international Pacific Islanders, it's just they weren't acquired by the US, right? And then as part of this, we now enter the Cold War. We enter a whole new decade of war legislation. And this is particularly important if you're from the Marshall Islands. This is a nuclear bomb test. There were 23 of them, I believe, nuclear tests, just blowing up things on their lands. Place is completely radioactive. It has affected people's DNA, right? That's why there's folks from the Pacific Islanders here in California. So moving along, also part of the now Cold War period, 1952. I'm going to come back to this law 3 times, right? The McCarran-Walter Immigration and Naturalization Act, it is a Cold War law. This is the law that says we're not going to look at race anymore for immigration. And it's because suddenly they're like, we need all these Nazi doctors and scientists to build our rockets. So our rocketry program is made by Nazi scientists who actually killed a whole bunch of people, right? Prior to this, the country didn't want to let in Jews and East Europeans and Southern Europeans, and at this point, they're like, oh, heck yeah, we need them, especially the scientists, right? So this was to eliminate that restriction. The other thing they did was this is when the student visa was created, the F visa that we use today. And it was to attract a certain kind of person, which was to create scientists and other folks to fuel the Cold War. So when we're a STEM research university, it's not an accident, it's by design, right? Like, they really wanted folks to come and fight the Cold War through technology. So moving along. Into the 50s, 60s, 70s, Laos. Laos is, unfortunately, sadly, the most bombed country in the history of the world. 500 million tons of bombs. This is equivalent to a plane load of bombs being dropped every 8 minutes, 24 hours a day for 9 years. Here's the kicker. The US was never at war with Laos. So it's this concept that some places are eminently destroyable, killable, bombable. It's an Orientalist concept, again, pioneered through the Indian Wars, right? We can look at other places in Southeast Asia like this, like Cambodia. Here's just an image of bombings in Cambodia, which there was never a ground war in Cambodia. All right, moving along. Sorry, I have to gloss over things, and I apologize. But so not 9/11, but the World Trade bombing is a car bomb in 1933. So, you know, these things have really changed the racialization, which I'm going to get to, of this APIMEDA group, right? So, like, you can see how the racialization of Southeast Asians as war people, like people you go to war with, the enemy. And now you see like the racialization of Middle Easterners once again, it's not the first time, as people you go to war with. And it starts in 1993 with new profound force with Clinton, and he actually creates this new policy in the wake of this bombing called the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. And this is what allows them to collect information on our students who are international. This is all in the name of fighting terrorism, right? So these acts that feel very domestic and have implications for us racially here have actually huge implications for our international students because we're connected, right? Likewise, after 9/11, 45 days hastily signed the Patriot Act, which allows spying. If you're spied on, you can't say you're being spied on. There's a number of things around this, but one of the things is it also creates SEVIS. And SEVIS is the information system that basically tracks all our international students as if they're terrorists. And they're very proud of this because they did catch, I think it was like 6 Egyptian international students in Utah who forgot to fill out the form in SEVIS. And this is their success. They've never caught a terrorist. Also following 9/11, remember how I mentioned the Modoc War? I used to teach this before 9/11, and people would be like, so what, Wayne? So Native people are not considered human, you're allowed to, anyone can murder them, it's not considered a crime. That's not relevant anymore. That's from 18, whenever it was, right? Well, remember all those people in Guantanamo who we were torturing? And it was decided that it was legal to do so? They cited the Modoc War, and they cited that Supreme Court decision. And they said, these are enemy combatants. Anyone can murder them, and it's not a crime, and therefore we can torture them. And here's some of the Q&A with John Yoo, ironically Korean and now Korean-American lawyer, who's considered one of the good guys, by the way, with all this new xenophobia. He's like somehow like, you know, representative. But yeah, they said, you know, so if the president decided you need to crush the testicles in front of a person's child, is that okay? And he said, it really just depends on if the president needs to do so. All right, these are called the torture memos. Again, like the complicity, the complexity, the Orientalism. Moving along to our other wars, I'm just gonna flip through these. These are really huge sensationalists, and I apologize for the trigger warning, misogynist photos. I'm just gonna show 2 of them from National Geographic, Time Magazine. And you know, these images are Orientalist. They justify our laws, they justify our actions. And the very, very famous theorist from India, Gayatri Spivak, says this is white men saving brown women from brown men. is the justification for war, is the justification for how many people we kill, even while we're killing those same brown women, right? So is it war? Maybe. Next question. Is it because we're aliens? You can laugh. This is super funny. Come on. I'm really funny. Normally, I don't do all this depressing stuff in class. Someone asked for law and history. Law and history is never that fun. All right, so this is actually Geisel Library, and this is one of our student veterans in Filipina, and this is what she does in the library, because we're aliens. I want to focus a little bit on Filipinos, so where was I going to go with this? Oh, I forgot my other question. Okay, wait. Do I have a cursor? Oh, man, cursor. Here's my cursor. All right. Okay, back to this really fast. Before 1952, there were no student visas because there weren't very many international students. It's like a few thousand, right? What was the largest group, what country, largest group of students from? Yes, Philippines. And for that, I have another prize for you, Amanda Solomon, who is the speaker tomorrow. Big plug for closing speaker. To be transparent, I was worried you'd be bored, so I brought these out of my kitchen this morning. So this is a gourmet sabzi mix, all right? All right, so they're Filipinos because Filipinos actually, if you remember, it's an acquisition from the Spanish Empire. And so Filipinos exploited this loophole, which is like, we actually are allowed to come here when no one else is allowed to come to the United States because we're actually U.S. citizens. And people were like, no, you're not citizens. But they're like, but you were part of U.S. territory. And like, we'll call you nationals. We'll give you a student visa. So the majority of Filipinos here in the 20s were actually students, right? And what they found was, I'll come back to that slide. What they found was they'd come here and they study at Stanford, like a very famous person studied at Stanford, can't remember the name right now. Victorio Velasco here, where the red arrow is very, very famous journalist. He studied as a student, and then they couldn't get jobs. So this is like our international students' experiences now, right? It's like they can get the visa, but then they can't stay and get a job, right? And it's like this very strange thing. And so he actually ended up becoming a journalist and helped with labor organizing, very, very famous. But, this is Stockton, the Filipino club there. So then they ended up working in canneries and farm labor. And this is why Filipinos were part of the founding of the United Farm Workers Movement. It's because of colonial displacement from the Philippines, all right? And the Stockton was dynamited, the Filipino club, in 1930. And a very famous Filipino-American writer, Carlos Bulosan, says, this is the year of great hatred, so the lives of Filipinos were cheaper than those of dogs. But in 1946, what happens? I know, Amanda, you know. So in 1946, the Philippines becomes its own country, and suddenly Filipino students go from being US nationals to foreigners, and then they're no longer allowed to come, right? So this whole line between domestic and international for APIMEDA groups is really like this weird line that is drawn around you all the time, like you're domestic and then you're international and domestic, okay? So going back to this slide, what is really important about this is the Immigration Act of 1952 is the first time that people who are considered non-white can get student visas into the United States. That's not very long ago. This university was founded around then. All right, so we're like, oh, there's suddenly a lot of Asians. It's like, well, maybe, or maybe it's because they just weren't allowed to be here for a while, right? But it depends on how you look at it. But they eliminated racial barriers for the first time, but they also reinscribed a whole new desirable subject. They're like, we want scientists, we want people who can build bombs, we want those kinds of folks. We don't want farm workers, cannery workers, we don't want people who work in sweatshops. Those are not the folks we want, right? We want people to fight the Cold War. And so this idea of like, that, who are these students here? Where are they from? I think John Moore told me, like, there's a common misconception, Jacobs School of Engineering, that most of their students are international students, and they are not. And it's because they see a bunch of students who phenotypically, they're just like, well, you look international, right? And this gives us to the common memes now. Where are you from? You all seen these memes, right? They're super funny. The person is like, Dubai, I live in Dubai, I eat gold for breakfast, right? It's kind of like, I'm the stereotype you're looking for. All right, so finally, moving along to I think the most important part of my presentation is what does it mean to be an us? Does it mean to be a wedge group for anti-blackness and for white supremacy? So Naturalization Act 1790, the first US Congress. So this is a brand new country. They're like, hey, I know you were citizens of England or France or Germany before when we were the colonies, but now we're the United States, and you can naturalize so long as you are a free white person. When did this change? 100 years? 1870, right? Sorry, my slides are out of order. Okay, so this allowed a lot of immigration to this country, except for there was a very set of specific groups being targeted to not come to this country, which were the quote-unquote Orientals, right? Far East, Near East, and Middle East, right? Which is sort of AsianPacificIslanderMiddleEasternDescent, kind of cool. And specifically, we think of it as Chinese exclusion in California, because California was really pushing for this. East Coast was not feeling this as much, but California's like, we don't want any Chinese people here. And Chinese people really wanted to be here, and they wanted to be here to be settlers, just like white folks, so it wasn't necessarily a good thing. We always think about Chinese people who work in the railroad. Not true. It's like the majority of them were already here doing businesses in San Francisco, LA, so on and so forth, here in San Diego. And they really just wanted to be like other settlers and like take native land and get rich, right? I mean, let's be honest. That's what it was about. But because of Chinese exclusion, they became minorities, which is convenient, I guess, in some ways, because we now live another history, which is a history of the civil rights movement and so on and so forth, right? The consequences of particularly black struggle in this country, right? But what's interesting about this is the Naturalization Act of 1790 is only white people, and then there's a big change that's coming up, a big change. And it comes at a very exciting time, which is right after the Civil War, right after emancipation, and during Reconstruction. Like, folks are rebuilding this country in a major way. Like, really, the country we live in is a country that came out of Reconstruction, not out of the Founding Fathers' BS. Like, that is not true. It's Reconstruction that built this country, right? And at this time, Frederick Douglass, the great, emancipated person, orator, abolitionist, huge speaker, he's going around the whole country, wherever he can, and he's speaking about one thing. It's called Our Composite Nation. He's giving this speech over and over. And he talks about? He talks about Chinese people. And he's just like, there's all this like anti-Asian hate. Like, but not me. I'm all for it. And he's like, I understand the competition. I understand that they're being imported to take over jobs from freemen who were formerly enslaved. I get that. They're here to be a wedge group, but I don't care, right? That's what kind of person Frederick Douglass was, right? So he's giving this speech everywhere calling Our Composite Nation. Here's a image from Harper's, and Harper's was sort of pro-Frederick Douglass, so they're drawing directly from his speech. So like a Thanksgiving should look like this. And you can see, very unusually, that there is a person with a Q representing like a Chinese person here, right? So this is Frederick Douglass. Well, isn't that interesting? Because the next year, the Naturalization Act is passed of 1870, and it gives the vote. Not the vote, that comes way later. It gives citizenship to colored people, meaning people of African descent. And the same law specifically banned citizenship from Asiatics. So who's the wedge group? Like, this is not a coincidence. that, hey, let's divide and conquer kind of approach, right? So just a brief history of Chinese exclusion. This is the usual Asian American Studies 101. I'm not an Asian American Studies person. I'm going to run through this really fast. So all kinds of things happen. 1924, they reinscribe this, that Asians cannot be included in this country. So this isn't just 1870, 1924. Oh, it's not just 1924, it's 1952. It's 1965. It just keeps going and going, right? I'm going to come back to these dates in a second. But 1952, does that look familiar? That's this again. Right, so what is really interesting, people always like to cite this law as this huge civil rights accomplishment. It was a Cold War accomplishment, right? And it was signed over President Truman's veto. And it was to attract Cold War workers. And it was not meant to be racial equality. And what it did was a few really interesting things racially. First, it said, now we have quotas. And so, yeah, technically you can come in now if you are all these groups that were considered non-white, Orientals and so forth, right? But we're only letting in like a very small number, y'all, right? So the quota system was established. And the other thing it did was it defined who white people were finally. Because up to this time, it was like the Supreme Court had to decide. It was very, very complicated for the Supreme Court. And so what they did was they drew a circle around Europe and they said, these folks are white. And that's really how Europeans became white in this country. I mean, I know like the Klan always thought they were white and all these other, but it's like, honestly, white people never thought they were white. It's kind of like, go to the East Coast and be like, I'm not white. Like, I'm like Scottish, I'm Irish, I'm Italian. Go to the Italian sector and tell them they're white. They'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? It's like, what is this white thing, right? But is this act that drew a circle on Europe and said, these are the white folks in the world, right? And so these are really important things. But going back to Chinese exclusion is actually like the visas invented for students, but not for Asian students. All right, that was not the intent, right? They were really going after Europeans who had previously been barred from entry along with Orientals, right? And that's what this act was about. You'll notice that usually it's celebrated this way. Asian exclusion ends in 1965. And it's sort of true. Because in 65, they're finally like, okay, we're not going to do quotas. Y'all can come. As long as you fit the bill. As long as you're a scientist, as long as you're desirable, right? And this gets us back to the wedge group thing, because why did that happen in 1965? Like, what's going on in 1965? I mean, here we have Muhammad Ali talking with Malcolm X. I want you to remember in 1960, 0.1% of the population was Chinese. That's the biggest group, by the way, right? Out of this quote-unquote Epimeta constellation. The US is at war in Vietnam. Muhammad Ali famously says, I'm not going. And he says, I'm not going not because I don't want to get killed, not because, all these things. He says, I'm not going because I'm in solidarity with all those people that you're trying to kill. And people are like, oh, we're not having this. I think he does that in 67, right? But it's this time period, right? And, it's what we think of as the civil rights movement. Really, civil rights movement started, day one that African person set foot on this soil, right? But really, like, we think of the civil rights movement. So coincidentally, 1965 is a year that they're just like, hey, we don't discriminate against Asians, right? And that 1966, this is the news, success story, Japanese American style. These are people who just got incarcerated, y'all. And now they're celebrated in 1966, right? Whoops. I skipped, okay, I don't have a slide, but there's one on Chinatown too, saying like, and it basically says like, hey, look at all these Chinese people working hella hard in Chinatown, not like these African-American folks who want a welfare check. That is literally what it says, and I don't remember the newspaper, it might be in USA Today, significant newspaper, right? So the model minority myth was manufactured in the 60s. This is a very new thing, right? These are the folks who could be killed before, and now suddenly they're like, those are the people you want? And it isn't just for quote unquote East Asians, right? So you can see this rearing its head all the time. Like this is recent news, 2021. Here's Ahmad Hassan, right? And this is it says, no work is shameful. Immigrants shape Michigan's small business economy. I mean, this is like Flint, Michigan. This is Detroit. This is the Rust Belt and in some ways a Black Belt. This is where Malcolm X is from. This is like, this language in 2021 is not an accident. It is part of the wedge group politics. I want to say that, anti-Asian hate and anti-Blackness is intimately connected. They're designed to go together, right? And it's not just anti-Asian hate. After 9/11, it was anti-Middle Eastern hate. It's folks who are not even in the AsianPacificIslander tent, like anti-Brown hate. And so these are, activists are trying to acknowledge that all the time. It goes back to the founding of ethnic studies, which was also in the late 60s. It was student organizations that got together in coalition and founded ethnic studies. So I owe my job to them. During this time of virulent anti-Asian speech, which is not just domestic students, it's international students. It is both international and domestic. Like everybody feels it. Nobody checks on you before they beat you up, whether you have a visa, all right? But in this time, there's also laws and policies or policies that resemble laws being passed, including ones that affected our students tremendously, which was the pandemic laws. And they're just like, hey, you're all going remote. Hey, international students, you can stay. That's March. And then in July, they're all, you know what, never mind. Like, prove to us that you're taking a class in person. We're all like, at UC San Diego, we're just suddenly like, I think the Dean of Undergrad Ed and VC Satterlund, they're saying, hey, can you create some classes that are in person for our international students? Because otherwise they're gonna get kicked out, right? These laws impact all of us regardless of your visa. But where I want to go with this wedge group is the thing coming up that's going to shake our campus next year, which is the Harvard lawsuit. Okay, so these are lawyers representing students for fair admissions who are suing Harvard saying, you're discriminating against Asian students. For a long time they were seeking Asian students to sign up for this lawsuit, and they couldn't get any. Because this was not started by Asians, right? And they even said, we're not even targeting Asians. Now they are, right? By the time they're like, oh, any student who feels discriminated against by their race who's trying to get into Harvard. But then their website looked like this, right? And this is an Orientalist website. Like, they're not putting an Asian woman on there by accident, right? This is some Flaubert's thing, right? She's not speaking for herself. She's not representing herself. He's speaking for her, right? And he's saying, like, he's going like this, I'm anti-Black. Right? That's a hand puppet move. So hashtag I'm not your wedge, very important movement. We're going to see that coming forward. This is going to impact domestic and international students. I'm going to try to wrap up soon. So what makes AsianPacificIslander us? What does it make, why is us and us? Is AsianPacificIslander just only some invention to be reinvented as needed, as a colonizer, as the colonized, as domestic, then international, as forever foreign, because you can never escape the international flavor to your identity, as a deportee, or as an assimilee, as non-white, as white adjacent, as Oriental, as enemy other, as relocated, as wedge group? Is that all it is? And is that all, are we serving that group that can only be that, right? And this is something VC Becky Pettit, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's because of, it's Andrew and Wendy's fault that I'm up here. So VC Pettit always points out, is we're not just about trauma, right? That we're coming from a position of strength, and I apologize if my talk, Amanda will do a much better job with this tomorrow, is coming from a position of oppression, but it is not a position of victimry, right? And so if all we can see is spam and colonization and not spam and how it tastes really good if you eat meat, or is it meat? You know, there is more to us than that if we are an us. And so I want to answer this question, what makes us an us? And I'll say, it could be solidarity. You can clap because that was sort of like one of my punchlines. I'm trying to wrap it up. And as Wendy Sasaki says, this is not a group, this is not a race, this is not an ethnicity, this is a coalition. Amanda Solomon tomorrow in closing will say much more about this, but I hope that we always think of the example of Frederick Douglass, right, who spoke out for people he understood were in competition with his people, all right? I want us to draw on the great Black feminist Caribbean thinker, M. Jackie Alexander, and acknowledge that this group is very, very, very different. It's a group filled with diversity and diversity within groups, intersectional diversity, and she says we must be fluent in each other's struggles. That's what solidarity requires. But I want to end with this last quote, which is circling back to Indigenous Pacific Islanders in particular. And what I know for sure that we are together in is we're together on this land. We're on Kumeyaay land, we're on Indigenous land, and we are here now together. And we inherit this legacy of hate, but also of struggle and love, and that we have to find our responsibility in that. And for the Kanaka Maoli, they have this principle called kuleana, which is hard to translate, but they talk about kuleana not only on the islands, but also in California, right? And it's sort of like my responsibility. And so this great professor at U of H, Hawaii, Noelani Goodyear Keopua, she says, she asks of herself, what is my kuleana in this place, to these people, to my own ancestors in history? Thank you so much for your time today. Oh, I heart you back. Oh, wait, I have one more prize. I had one more prize. So, this is how we do it around here. We're going to share this. You two can split this one. Thank you for organizing. Here you go.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Just another quick thank you to Provost Yang. Provost Yang's insights and grounding for our symposium are definitely, I think, very powerful. I think, thinking about how we're thinking about our students and what this means for both international and domestic and how those lines are kind of drawn, right, is very important, right? We have them as these two separate days, but thinking about how different factors impact our different populations, even though we talk about this under one large group, is going to be something that's very important for us as we go through the next couple days. Right now, we're going to be doing a short break. Just as a reminder, the restrooms are outside to the left. There is a hydration station off to the right. Please feel free to take a break, get up and stretch if you need to. We'll be reconvening back in this room at 10:45.